This is my Celtic 14 and I like it very much. But there's also something I don't like on this machine, and that is this quick change tool post. Now don't get me wrong, this thing is a nice piece of equipment and it works perfectly fine. But there are a few little problems with it. For example, if I want to work this workpiece, of course my cutting tool has to start over here. Otherwise it's impossible to work it. And because of the length of this workpiece, of course it also needs tail support. But my headstock is touching here the carriage, which means I have to stick out way too much of this barrel. Loss of rigidity. The second problem is also a rigidity problem. It's a little bit less important, but still. Because of below here, there's nothing to support the tool. When I take big cuts, I see the whole thing bending a little bit. It's moving. It should be much better if my tool is supported over here and not over nothing. And the third problem is visibility. When I'm standing here, which is the typical workplace, so you have all the handles here, I cannot see my cutting tool from here, which means I have to lean over, and now I can see it. Another solution to see my cutting tool is of course also to stand over here. Now from here, for facing operations, I can see. But what's more important is that here I'm just in line with my face and the cutting tool, and this is guarantee a chips bombardment in your face. That's not good. But indeed it is a quick change tool post, and changing the tools is quick. And what's also very handy is this pin for locating. So this works perfectly fine. So you see, it's not scrap, but I think we can do better. So today's project will be making a tool post like this one. Now this is the one from the other lathe, and this works perfectly fine. And if I put it here, I can see that I have perfect visibility over my cutting tool. And because of the cutting tool is supported on top of this surface here, way more rigid. Here's a small collection of the tools I use on the USSR lathe. And as you can see, they all fit these tool posts. And the idea is of course that the cutting tip is always at the same height. Now for my boring bar I have this shim, but with this shim this is automatically center height. This is of course to make smaller bars. And all these tools do not fit my quick change tool holders, so it's a little bit stupid. I would like to be able to use these tools on both lathes. So the plan is to turn these pieces of rust here into a tool holder that's gonna look more or less like this one, and when my tool is put in place without any shims or whatever, automatically this will be center height. Let's go for it. I had to cut it in 2 times because top of my part here is touching, and then the saw blade wasn't deep enough. But I've got it. I left the 2 parts in one, so now I clean up a few faces, and when it's all more or less square and parallel, of course I will cut it in 2 to have 2 nice little squares. surface finish, not spectacular. Sharpening. Before I start cutting this surface to make this thing to thickness, it may be interesting to know how much I have to cut off. And so I took some measurements. And that's where I see that, in fact, there is a little bit a problem. Of course, there's always a problem. The tool holder I want to make is gonna look like this, and I already installed the tool in here. And this thing is at center height. Now, if my tool is installed and if I copy the thing exactly like this one, I see that my tool is too high. Which means if I make this bottom plate a little bit thinner, in theory it could work. But this thing is gonna bend. It's not thick enough to take all these cutting forces. So maybe if I can take off this plate and make it a little bit thinner, or why not make a new one and square, because this one is circular. It should be better square so that the corners are supported. Let's see if I can take it off. Moving. Yes! In here is a roll pin. Comes in this hole for locating the thing. And this hole is of course for the locating pin of the tool holder. But the same hole is also here in the back. If I install my tool holder on this surface without any shim or nothing, I can put it on because this roll pin here is in the way, but I'm sure you've got a point. This height, and then bring in center height. And if I measure here, I have 5 millimeters. 5 plus the thickness of this thing here, which is 12. 5 and 12, 17. So, if I cut this plate at 17 millimeter, which is perfectly possible because now I have more or less 19.5, so 1.5 to take off, and I put my tool on it, this should be center height. But just to be sure, first I'm gonna try to take out this roll pin here and make more precise measurements, if it's possible. Oh, moving. Got you. Installing a thing directly on this surface will be much better. And if I want, I can even make a little bit a bigger one, because here I have, I don't know, 6 or 7 millimeter over, and on this side too. But I don't have plate big enough to make it bigger. So this 80 millimeter, it will be. Right, let's continue shaping. I left it a tiny bit oversized. Let's call it 17/100 over. And while we're here, we're gonna check for parallelism. (17) oversize. So exactly the same. For me, good enough. So this thing is more or less parallel and I'm really happy with the results. But when finished there will be these little cutouts because this was all material I had. But whatever. Right, let's cut. Two parts at the same time. In one setup. Too tight. Two squares left a tiny bit oversized for the final touch. And I think now it's time to start this one. That of course comes here between. Let's do this. I installed the big blue vise to do some tests. Because this part is gonna be a nice little cube, more or less. I wanna check the squareness of the jaw in relationship to the horizontal movement. When I received this vise, because it's a viewer gift, it was perfect. And over time it became a little bit out of square. So I recutted the surface and it was again perfect. And now it is again out of square. So let's check. And now you're gonna tell me that in fact I'm doing it wrong. And you're right, I'm doing it wrong. This jaw is the fixed jaw and my workpiece is moving this way, which means the cutting forces are pushed into the moving jaw and so also into my little wire here. To be good, it should be the other way around, but working like this for me is easier, it's more convenient, so I do it a little bit wrong just to make it easier. Before I started cutting my little block here, I installed a shim between the casting of the fixed jaw and of course this jaw itself. 1/10 of a millimeter jaw. And I checked for squareness and it's really close. And this was the first face I made, and then left and right is 2 and 3. And now indeed it is square, both sides. So if for example you have a vise with the same problem, it's not really square, this could be a quick and easy solution. And it's cheap. That's a nice finish. And here it is. All that's left to do is to bolt these three parts together. And I have these magnificent little bolts here, just the right length. But I need 4 and I had only 2. So I bought new. The smell of fresh bolts in the morning. But it's 5 p.m. Whatever. These could work perfectly fine. A tiny bit too long, but that's okay. Of course I will cut them off. So all that's left to do is to drill and tap lots of holes so I can install these bolts to hold my tools together, which are the same than in this tool holder, so same spanner, and also same in this one. Standardization. In this one I'm gonna drill all the holes that we see here on top, so for these bolts, and the other part will receive only these 5 holes. Now the 4 for the hold together bolts I will drill in here, and when the whole thing is assembled I will drill through all the parts at the same time. But I'm not gonna bother you too much with drilling and tapping on the milling machine, because I suppose there's more than enough videos on YouTube where you can see some kind of dude drilling and tapping. So just a little bit. Tapping by hand, primitive. Countersink, not primitive. All that's left to do now is to drill this center hole 16 mm, and of course cut off these little bolts that stick out. Too short. And if I install my workpiece like this, I don't think there's enough room here. Nope. Shit. So I have to install my part directly on the table. It's on the floor. And I forgot the washer. My first idea was to cut off these 4 bolts here just on the belt sander and make it flat, and that's all. But because my part is now set up here on the milling machine, I can as well do it here. This thing is 80 millimeters and my cutter is 40. So in theory, half and half, that should work. Give it a light touch on this surface here. Let's see if it works. Here's the finished product. It works! And the most important is of course that now I can see my cutting tool. I see what I'm doing without hurting my back and getting my face too close to the workpiece. And what I think is a little bit a funny detail is that everyone who has a tool post like this one on his lathe would like to upgrade to something like this. And I do, well,